Hey folks, this is Milan, the LSAT tutor again, and today we'll be going over how to read faster, specifically why developing your focus is key. All right, so what's the importance of focus? What is engaged reading, and how do I implement it in my LSAT prep? Well, just to give an overview, basically, focus saves you time. You have to do more than sound out the words, and you use basically you want to use your RC passages and arguments, or RC reading comprehension passages and arguments, logical reasoning arguments, as an opportunity to practice engaged reading. Okay, usual before we jump into it, please like, subscribe, comment, helps me a lot with these videos. And check out my site for more videos and articles and over 20 hours of completely free LSAT prep. All right, so the importance of focus. Why is it important to read with focus? Basically, focus reading saves time because it reduces the need to reread passages when you're initially reading and when you're answering the questions. Um, Many people take longer to read because they're not following what they're reading, and then they have to go back and reread in order to understand what's going on. So, slow reading isn't necessarily a question of moving your eyeballs slower. It's because you're going back and you're rereading stuff, and this is often because you're not paying attention to the content of the passage. So you may be reading the words, but you're not actually thinking about what they mean. So this leads to zoning out and not absorbing the information. And then when you realize that you haven't been paying attention, you have to go back and you have to reread the passage. So that's where a big part of wasting time comes in. Focus reading helps you avoid this problem by helping you to stay engaged with the content of the passage. You're more likely to understand what you're reading, and you won't have to reread it as often. So if you stay focused on the text, even if it means reading more slowly at first, you're going to save time in the long run because if you stay focused, you won't have to go back and reread. So you also won't be stopping and starting, which is, by the way, another problem. Stop, start, you lose your concentration, your train of thought. Now, you may still choose to reread parts of the text to, refresh your or kind of establish your understanding of the overall structure, but you're not going to be rereading because you didn't understand it the first time. Now, this focused approach also makes answering questions easier because it provides a clear understanding of the text. So when you have a better understanding of the passage or of the argument, it's just easier to evaluate the answer choices against the text. This is especially true when the choices require you to go back to the passage in the reading comprehension. You're simply going to be spending less time looking for the right place to evaluate the choice. So you're saving time by not rereading it, by having a better understanding. You're not going back and kind of trying to develop that understanding when you're attacking the choices. Okay, so how do we develop engaged reading? So what exactly is engaged reading and what are the techniques that we can use to develop? So in addition to developing focus more generally, there actually are specific reading techniques that can help you become more fully engaged with the text and sort of gain a clear understanding of its meaning and structure. So as I mentioned a bunch of times, meditation can significantly improve your overall focus. When you focus on an object like your breath, you train your mind to be more aware when your attention shifts and what emotions are causing you to get distracted. And I discussed this in depth in actually a couple of other articles and videos, so you go check that out. Now, in terms of more specific techniques to train yourself to read more effectively, you want to practice visualization techniques instead of just sounding out the words. A lot of people will just read and they'll hear the words, but they'll be thinking or they'll be visualizing or they'll be imagining something completely different. So as you read, you want to create a mental image that just captures the main points of that statement or that sentence that you're reading. And then as you keep on reading, as you continue reading, add details to this image. So this technique, it doesn't require a sort of perfect mental image. Just use your imagination to represent what the text is saying. And actually, a good way to train yourself to do that is to summarize. So after you finish reading a section, such as an argument in the argument section or a paragraph in the reading comp, summarize it in your own words. Why? Because when you finish an argument or a paragraph without looking back at the text, and you try and rephrase in your own words in one sentence what the text is about, and you want to use the format sort of conclusion because premises. You start with a conclusion. That's you want to do that because that's generally the most important info in what you're reading, the conclusion. If you do that, this helps you actually practice visualizing as you read, because if you know that when you're done with that argument or with that paragraph, you're gonna have to summarize the text to yourself. That helps you stay focused because over time, it's just gonna be tedious to go back and skim the text to come up with that summarization, which is I found with all of my students. I asked them, okay, read the argument, give me a summary when you're done. They read the argument and then they're like, okay, and then they go back and they skim to figure out the summary. And if you just train yourself, you tell yourself, okay, every time I read an argument, I'm going to give myself a summary, or every time I read a paragraph in a reading company, I'm going to give myself a quick one sentence summary. You're just going to get you're gonna get it's gonna be tedious. You're not gonna want to keep going back, and that'll sort of force you. Okay, let me just visualize as I'm reading, and then the summary. I'm just describing what's in my head. So this is very. I found this to be very very useful to help you develop this ability to stay engaged. You are creating a visual image, and to help you do that, you're training yourself to give a summary, which is just a description of that image. Just that way, you're kind of tricking yourself into visualizing. Now, in addition to that, clarification is actually also a very useful tactic. So you basically make general or abstract text easier to understand as you're reading it. Now, many of these passages, many of the arguments in LSAT, they've got language that's hard to grasp, that's kind of general, that's very abstract, and you want to turn that into, if it's abstract, for example, you want to turn it into more concrete words, stuff that you're familiar with, that is less intimidating, and that can help you actually visualize and imagine what you're reading more clearly. Now, you want to be careful not actually to change the meaning. So if you simplify, don't make it so that it's something different from what it's saying. And this, admittedly, this takes a little bit of practice and experience going through it. But if you do that in these passages, in these arguments that you're not familiar with, you'll be surprised, or rather that have language that's more general abstract. You'll be surprised how things really clarify when you reword using concrete language. So essentially, if you encounter a sentence or a part of a sentence you're confused by, you can just always replace abstract with more concrete language. And likewise, if it's general, you can always give yourself more specific examples. Um, Likewise with complex language. If you encounter complex language with lengthy sentences or sophisticated vocabulary, so not necessarily general or sort of abstract, but just complex presentation, you can make it simpler. Simplify the sentences by breaking them up. Use a more direct active voice. Don't use the passive voice. The passive voice tends to be, a little bit sort of like complicated and wordy. Use simpler words instead of more sophisticated ones. Eliminate unnecessary filler words. So these are all ways in which you can make complexity a little bit simpler. In addition to that, figuring out the relationships in the arguments in the passages is also a very useful technique. What you're looking to do is you're looking to understand the structure and function of the different parts of the paragraph or the argument. This basically involves identifying the roles or functions of the different elements and recognizing common argument elements and common argument types. So you want to start by you want to start by looking for conclusions, for premises, and for subconclusions in the text. And these elements are the backbone of arguments. Conclusions are the main points that the author wants to convey. Premises are the reasons supporting these conclusions, and subconclusions are conclusions that go on to actually provide support for additional conclusions. You can think of them as links in the chain. You also want to pay attention to perspectives, which are points of view that the author attributes to a group or an individual, often followed by a critical response. And as I said prematurely, in terms of argument types, there's different things you want to look for. You want to look for characterizations. These are These are arguments which discuss the nature or the characteristics of something. Evaluations, they're a type of characterization that talks about, characterize something as good or bad. Proposals are calls to action, suggestions for future behavior or for future policy. Explanations are arguments that speculate about the cause of something, what explains something, and consequences are, or predictions as I have here, are arguments that speculate about potential effects. So this is sort of very broad overview. You can actually check out the first and second lessons in my free LSAT prep on my site, where I go into a lot of detail and have a lot of uh, exercises about breaking down arguments in terms of the argument elements and the argument types. Okay, so that's essentially what engaged reading is. It's keeping maintaining your focus through visualization, and then doing all these techniques like simplification, what else, the making it more less complex with simplification, making it more concrete as opposed to abstract, looking for these different types of relationships, whether the argument relationships or different types of arguments. And if you apply all of that stuff, you'll be able to maintain your engagement with the text much more easily. Now, how do we go about implementing this? So, how do we implement these practices in this engaged reading? Well, basically, the goal is to practice these reading techniques when you're doing on-time drills, both for the arguments and for the reading comprehension. It's relatively straightforward. So, um, just remember, drilling is not just about getting as many questions right as possible. So, in the context of getting fast in your reading, it's about using the arguments and the passages as an opportunity to get better at engaged reading. So, as you drill, make a conscious effort to approach each question or each passage thoroughly using the reading techniques that I just showed you here. So, you're not worried about timing. That when you're doing this stuff, like if you have 2 weeks under the test, it's something else. But when you're starting out, when you're giving yourself enough time, the first part of LSAT prep, you don't worry about timing. Your goal is to get good at reading. So, like I said, this applies if you're in the early stages and you're not doing time sections. If the test is approaching, you're doing time sections. That's different. But I mean, actually, even then, if you're not a strong reader, it'll still be useful to set aside time to do untimed reading, just in order to improve your reading ability, your engagement, your focus, and your speed is gonna come from that. So you're not going to get faster by training yourself to move your eyeballs faster. You're going to get faster by getting better at this stuff. So even in those situations, if the test is coming up, if you feel that you need to work on that, you want to set aside some time for do that. Now, likewise, when doing arguments questions, as you're reading the stimulus, make sure to employ the above techniques. So summarization in particular is like I said a couple of minutes ago, it is an amazing, it's a very good way to train you to visualize and to clarify. And also keep in mind that being clear on the structure is also very useful for developing a deeper understanding of each question type and how to find the correct answer. So it's not just you getting better at reading; it's also going to applying this is going to get you better, get you to become better at the logical reasoning of the argument section. For the passages, it's a bit more of a challenge generally because they're longer. So when you initially work on them, you can have a rest between paragraphs and then apply what we talked about the arguments and all that, apply that to those paragraphs. So make sure that you have a clear understanding of each paragraph before you go on to the next one. Okay, so that's basically the situation. You want to apply these techniques when you're doing the reading parts of the test, the reading comprehension and the arguments. All right, so to summarize, focus reading saves time in LSAT preparation because it reduces the need to reread passages when you're initially reading it and when you're answering questions. In addition to developing general focus, so meditation, practice these specific reading techniques to help you become fully engaged with the text and gain a clear understanding of its structure. And the goal is to practice these reading techniques when doing on-time drills for the arguments and reading comprehension sections of the LSAT. All right, so thanks for checking out my video. Hope you found it useful. As I mentioned, you can check out my free prep course for a more in-depth look at some of the things that I covered here, specifically the structures of reading comprehension passages and arguments. Okay, until next time.